we should be live.
Yep.
Robert, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about the night and what we're going to do once we get officially started. We're about 5 minutes early before our start time, so we'll just kind of chat a bit here.
That was kind of odd. I was not like seeing any splash screen. It was just like, there we go.
Oh,
That's much better.
Really? It wasn't showing up?
Not for me. As soon as I refreshed, it came up.
I don't know, because typically we would already have somebody in saying hey or whatever, and we don't. There it is. Now there's Tim. Yeah, I just think it might have had a little bit of a delay getting up live. Hello, Tim. Good to see you tonight, sir. We're still a couple minutes early. We don't start till 5:45. Hello, Pat. That's funny. I'm so, like, honestly, that's so honoring to me that people go back and watch, 3-hour sessions of a game you played, 2.5 years ago. That means, hey, Jeff, good to see you. And I hope she likes it. There's a lot of fun stuff, and you'll see some repeating themes. She's been binge watching. That's awesome. That is so cool. I've sometimes wondered, is there any point in putting all that content up on YouTube? But if it brings just one person a little bit of joy to go back and watch some of it, and particularly those that joined in some of these stories later, and you can see how the characters were formed and how far they've come, and maybe some of the little esoteric inside jokes, Cade when he first claimed to be a pirate and or a captain rather, and he really wasn't, or the slaughter of Thovin. You have Ixen the betrayer, all those things that you're hearing, but you get to see the origin of that and how it all got developed over that 3-year period of time. I tell you, it's averaging 2 to 3 episodes a day. That's like 9 hours. oh, that's wow, that's awesome. Question: when starting a new campaign, how do you arrange a TPK during the session 0? Actually, I've had some ideas around that, Tim. Where characters think, the players think they're going in with a certain group of characters, and you TPK them all in the first session as part of the broader storyline, and the new characters that they make, it's inclusive of the fact that this other group, perhaps it's an vengeance of them, or perhaps it's family, or I don't know. It is a fun way to do it.
There's a rule set. I forgot which one of the games where your characters can actually die during the course of character creation. I don't quite understand how that works, but okay.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know what it was. I know why you were sounding. I did this once before. I forgot to turn off my external speakers, so it's creating a little feedback through the microphone, and then it sounds funny in my headphones. Should all be better now. Watching past episodes is cheaper than starting your car. I'm confused.
That's not a lie.
Non sequitur there. I'm not sure what that means, but yeah, it's true.
Why go anywhere?
Yeah, I don't think we started posting until session 4, maybe. So like the first couple, I'm trying to remember. I think we really started the Rune Lords. Yeah, we started it before we started Blue Box. So there were like 2 or 3 sessions that were not even streamed at the time, so therefore they weren't recorded and pushed up to YouTube. If I remember right, I think that was the order of events.
Hi, Amanda.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Baptized in Pus, good to see you back here, and welcome from Minnesota. It's still a deeply graphic mental image I think of every time I read your username. Yeah, we're just going to have a fun little chat here tonight. Hello, Patrick. Good evening to you as well, sir. And we'll switch over to video in 1 minute. Start right on time tonight. Thanks for your patience. Yes, we had some funny stuff happening with the PC here. My trusty Alienware box over the weekend, if you watch the Rune Lords finale, there were some weird audio things that happened, and then I had like, JPEG images that wouldn't even pop up, and then last night we had a complete meltdown, and system had to be all kind of rewired and redone. So thanks for your patience with us, and I apologize for those that were all geeked up. Yeah, I do think that that's unfortunate, but I think it did have the glitter has created some ghosts in the machine, as you will. So I blow it out periodically and just try to keep it as minimal as possible. And even if that's not the reason, it's just still fun to blame Rory because he's a good sport about it too. All right, and let's go ahead and kick it off. Here we go. 3, 2, and 1.
For those of you needing proof of life.
All right, hello, welcome everyone. Loremasters Arcanum. This is episode 80. It's kind of fun to see. We're at 78, I believe, now on Greyhawk Awakening. We just finished 92 in Rune Lords. We're at 80 LMAs. We're coming in on 300. Well, actually, if you count some of the one-shots and the charity streams, yeah, we're probably right there at 300 episodes of Blue Box streamed in one way or another over the last 2.5 years. So it's kind of neat to see those numbers grow. Tonight, I am joined by our good friend and most heavily decorated Discord community member. You all know Robert quite well. He's also the reigning male karaoke champion in Blue Box. I will endeavor to change that next year for Blue Box Con. And all-around good guy. You also know him as a purveyor of all things castles and crusades, runs our Friday night crusades, and is just a very beloved member of the community. Robert, thanks again for being on with us tonight. And of course, one of the questions on everyone's mind, I know you were on stream Monday as well, but we know, of course, you were quite ill over the weekend and had to spend a couple of days in the hospital. So just tell us how you're doing.
Yeah, no, so I'm doing much better. It's, still get tired because you have spent 5 days. I was laid up with pneumonia and 5 days of not doing anything. I mean, you couldn't, exercise was basically the test walking up and down the hall, and only got to do that once a day. So yeah, not a heck of a lot going on there. I want to thank everyone because, so many people reached out. And I have to give special thanks to Amanda because, she kept me sane. She kept the information flowing and basically, was my lifeline for the first three days or so while I was still kind of a little loopy.
Yeah, she does kind of rock, doesn't she? Thank you so much, Amanda. She was keeping me updated, and of course I was texting you separately, but she was typically giving me information before you were, so it was very, very helpful. And we're glad you're hale. I know you've still got a bit of a lingering cough, but you look good and you sound good tonight. So again, thanks for joining us. And yeah, Tracy, we were just talking about you. Thank you so much. It's so cool. You're binge watching. You're already on episode 13 of the Rune Lords. So you're getting through it pretty quickly there. And yeah, in the early days, there were one or two that got missed. Twitch has when you're not partner, they have I think it's a 14-day limit to get your uploads up on YouTube. And in the early days, we didn't have a good process. And now, of course, Evelyn gets all those up, in plenty of time. And I don't think we've missed any in the last 40 or 50 episodes. But in the early days, we did have a couple that got missed. So I apologize, but it was probably just a lot of Cade drinking in those episodes, so might not have missed too much in the story. So tonight, yeah, thanks. We're gonna have a good time, just a fun chat, and thank you very much, Tracy, and a light chat, but also a helpful chat. We're talking tonight about tips for starting campaigns, and we've had some similar LMA chats in the past, but I want to be very specific with some things tonight. And of course, Robert is a very experienced DM and has also a slightly different style. And so we're going to talk about different ways that you prepare for a campaign. And I know Robert tends to be very ad hoc with a lot of what he does. Whereas I tend to have, I think a little more of a blended structure of ad hoc and structured content, and differences in styles, DMs and players. And there is no right or wrong answer to that. I really want to just get into different advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, it is, isn't it, Toriano? To these different play styles, and then you figure out what works for you and what you like. And I'll talk specifically about why I play the style that I play, and Robert will do the same. Hey, Jay, we'll also tonight be covering, I've got a pretty neat website that I pulled up we'll look at, and then I've got just a few notes that I jotted down here. Style, setting, story, subplots, overlaying people is the critical thing. It's all about the people, whether that's the DM, the players, the story style that they want to tell together. And so we're going to talk through all of that tonight. I do want to throw a couple... no jumping jack competitions for you. I do want to throw a couple polls out tonight as well. This is timely, as I said, and helpful because I'm actually in the process right now of starting 2 new campaigns. And it's going to be, very important that I think through the things that I want to do with these. And then if you take Greyhawk Awakening Book 3, which will be at some point here on the horizon, that'll be a 3rd new campaign, and each of these have different flavors and different styles and things that we can all just discuss tonight. So with that as an overall backdrop, Robert, we know you've played D&D for a long time, but if you were to go back and just have to guess over your DMing career, how much DMing have you done that was more of the one-shot variety or running a module versus how many have been long-term contiguous campaigns that you have run and created?
If I had to, I mean, early on, as kids, maybe the campaign was more just, we had the same characters. There may not have been a campaign to speak of. We just, found different adventures to run them on and such. So it's like an ongoing thing. But after that, I want to say probably 85% of it's been campaigns. Most of the one-shots that I've run really have come in the last 2 years as we've moved online.
Yeah. No, I think that's, and I really think that was how the game was meant to be played. It's fun to play the one-shot. It's cool to have the stories or the tournament games that get run. But these long-term, character stories and campaigns, and each of these can be different. If you look at what Jay does, his players will typically have multiple PCs, and even though he refers to it correctly as one of the, if not the longest contiguous running campaign, well over 40 years now, it's really more of a setting with the campaign elements to it than necessarily a single contiguous story. Very difficult to tell the exact same story for 40 years, or the same story thread, rather. But, of course, what Jay has done through those 4 decades is lore has been built, NPCs, dynasties, families, relationships, and these things are constantly interwoven into the evolving narratives in his game. That's a fantastic style to run, and he'll move back and forth between different PCs with the same group of players. There's just a lot of different ways to do it. So I'm going to pop a poll in the chat. And really, the question could be interpreted in one of 2 ways. Do you prefer one-shots or campaigns? And you could say, well, do you mean what I like running, what I like watching, or what I like playing in? However you want to answer it. I'm just kind of curious. And actually, I'll do one more. I'll do sort of short adventures / con events. There we go. And so just, kind of tell us what you think, and we'll pop that in the chat. It'd be fun to get some feedback tonight. I do want to get some suggestions from the gaming community here, particularly as I'm kicking off. Campaign term is misused in 5e. Yeah, I think adventure paths, that's something that Paizo did really well. If you look at Rune Lords, I would call that a campaign, because it was well more than just the adventure path, and produced, let's say, roughly 300 hours of gaming content, but it was following the structure of that Rune Lords, which is something else I want to talk about tonight. But if you look at what Greyhawk is, or what the Forgotten Realms, those are campaign settings, and then Jay's campaign setting and campaign have morphed and evolved over these 4 decades and created all this fun lore and content. Any comments or thoughts you have on that, Robert?
No, I agree with that for the, pretty much. Yeah, I can agree with pretty much all of that. I think back to when I was thinking a little bit more about when we were kids, and for me, the big thing when we were younger was modules. Those were the adventures that grabbed me, and we'd have the same characters, and I mean, if we were using the same characters and they were all in the world of Greyhawk, was it a campaign?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly. And thanks again for folks joining in tonight. I know there are a lot of people on vacation. Out of offices are like crazy right now at work. But thanks everyone that has time to pop in tonight, and we're going to have a fun chat. So let's start with when you start a new campaign, Robert, I think the players are the most critical piece, player to DM match, right? So, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on that tonight because that's a thing unto itself. Jay, for example, he really likes having players that are those who he's known for a very long time, his lifelong friends, because there is a stability and a commitment there, and they know each other so well for so many years. That is a great way to be able to have a stable, long-term campaign. Obviously, that's difficult to do sometimes if you haven't been playing that long. And hey, some people pop in and they're available. Look at Chandler. Chandler has been a fantastic part of our streams and Blue Box. I would not have wanted not to have Markov and Chandler in the game, but we really only got him for about a year and a half because he headed off to law school. And I'm sure we'll see him again on Blue Box. But each of those sort of, the people that that could be such a stable and strong, structured process. Also, bringing in new people gives you new friends, introduces new people to the game, and both are good. But you've got to have that player DM relationship. So I'm going to say that as kind of a given, and let's move to the actual campaign question. So the first thing I put is style. When you think of styles of campaign, Robert, wow, it was a crush. There were no votes for one-shots. People like campaigns. Well, not surprising, particularly since you're watching this show and these channels. Yes, and lifelong enemies. That's right. So when you think of campaign style, Robert, what are some of the first questions you want to think through when you start planning and communicating to your players what the game is going to be like? So just to give you a prompt, if you look at Friday Night Crusades, you were very clear with people at the beginning. This is what the style of Friday Night Crusades is going to be. This is what it's not going to be. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
So, I mean, some of it depends on personal bandwidth. I mean, Friday Night Crusades, I knew what we needed, what I needed in order to be able to actually do this for the community and be able to accommodate as many people as wanted to play. And there were certain things that I was just not going to be able to do. As much as I'd like to, great big character arcs or story arcs. There's going to be story arc, or possibly, but character arcs, big, huge backstories and tying all that. I can't do that, especially if the characters are going to be here one week, gone the next week. So, sometimes that circumstances can force your hand. And I think one of the things that I've had to deal with over the years is my player base keeps changing constantly. For the longest time, it was me, my brother, and maybe one or two friends of ours. Maybe sometimes for years it was just my brother and myself playing. One of us DMing, the other one playing, and it was usually me DMing. Then I had friends in high school for 3 years that I played with. Got to college, had friends, but it keeps changing. So I keep having to adapt, which is fine. It's allowed me to try different things because I've got styles of games that I will not try for some of my players because I know it just doesn't work.
What would be an example of that?
So my college buddies, we started playing freshman year of college, and we've been playing together on and off for 30 years now. I can't do a heavy role play campaign with them.
Right.
There are some of them are a little bit better than others, but if I tried to do a full-on Blue Box level role play campaign, it's going to fall flat because it's just not the way they're used to playing. It's not the game they enjoy.
Sure.
So, I have a game for them that I tailor to what they're good at, what they enjoy, and what works. And I still enjoy the game style. It's not something I want to run all the time. It's a nice change of pace, but I can tailor my game to the people it also allows me to play with different settings if I wanted to, or different, high fantasy, low magic if I wanted to, steampunk, whatever I need to do.
No, that's fantastic. And you said several things there. I want to come back to. Let's keep the piece of sort of structure and planning. Let's hold that till we get to story. Because you could throw that in style, but I want to have a whole separate section on story. But coming back to style, so yes, already was mentioned in here high fantasy. I think Fraley popped that in the chat. With high fantasy, that carries certain expectations of game style and gameplay. And then you've got, the world setting, which we're going to talk about setting as well, but you mentioned punk or cyberpunk or whatever. But I think the other thing that you really hit on is play style. You have some people that really want almost exclusively roleplay. Some people don't want any combat. I see these streams where they don't really do much combat. It's all roleplay. You see others which are much more combat based, and maybe even go to what was oftentimes ascribed to 4E as being just much more of a board game strategy game than an actual role-playing game, and then everything in between. And while I have certain preferences, ultimately they're all fine, they're all good. And I get what you're saying. You could have a certain group of players that they'd be happy with just all combat and the sort of the gaming table and the board and maybe a little light sprinkling of role play, and others would get bored out of their skull and just want to role play all the time. My preference and the style of game that I run, I think is a pretty good blend of the two. I don't want a game without combat. To me, combat is a fun part of the game. It's how you sort of measure the progress that you're making with your level ups and your abilities and whatnot. It adds that element of concern and fear for the character's safety, the triumph of it. But also, too much combat gets very, to me, stale and static. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. But Robert, what are your thoughts on that? And while you're answering, I'm putting up another poll. Magic, this is a critical element of your gaming style. Do you go, high magic style? Think, your Harry Potter. Really, Lord of the Rings was pretty low magic if you look at the actual setting structure. Although there is certainly some magic in there. If you look at the Forgotten Realms, that would be a very high magic setting in most ways it's structured. And this influences the entire game, the level of magic that you want. So I'm going to put that up in the poll, see what kind of games our players, our viewers here prefer. But Robert, back to this topic of play style with role play and combat and pacing.
So I love combat in games. Though I'm also very judicious as to how much combat I put in, because there's a time and a place where jumping from one combat to another, if the story takes you there, where you're constantly fighting, that's fine. I've been a player in too many games, unfortunately, where it was just an endless slog against too many minions and too much stuff. And combat, if it's done well, it's fantastic. And I mean, we started off looking at the monster manual, looking through the monsters, like, oh, what can this be?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What on earth is this?
Or the treasure tables in the back of the DM's guide, and who didn't want a Vorpal blade when they were 9, right? I mean,
this is really cool. But if you don't take care in how you create those combat encounters and make them interesting, and not just X amount of things versus the party and figuring out where that number should be, it can get boring really quick, even for me. And one of the things I like, and one of the things I like about the older editions in Castles and Crusades now, is the fact that combat moves quickly.
Right.
We go through combat. I don't care how many mobs there are. Combat's going to go relatively quick. So that helps, and I think that's one of the things that I've realized over the years playing newer editions was, okay, this is where I'm starting to run into a problem, and I want to kind of scale back and go back to where.
Yeah, that's interesting. And with combat pacing, I like Tim's comment. There must be lots of killing. Can there ever be too much? Some say that the level of magic is inversely proportional to your own intelligence. Really, I have not heard that one, Tim. So I think when it comes to magic, and it looks like the poll is, again, pretty dominant toward mid-magic. And I think I would agree with that. I think my games tend to be mid-magic. But if I were going to choose something other than mid, I would go low. I do like the grittier elements of the campaign. Now, the beautiful thing about D&D is you don't have to do the same thing every time. So, you know, I've run some campaigns that were super low magic, but then if the next campaign, look at how the Rune Lord stuff has, you know, has unfolded. I'd say it's become sort of a mid to high magic game as these characters have leveled up and they've got engagement with, you know, monstrous creatures. And I think that still managed to stay fun and relevant as a story. Or if you think about what Josh was doing with Children of Dirt, I think he was making a very intentional effort to play sort of low magic, gritty, which I think is also fun. But you don't have to do the same thing. You could do a different style the next campaign. The other thing with combat, and I think a good DM, this is one of the most important skills, is sensing your table and knowing when some piece is going on too long. There have been times where I have just ripped out an additional encounter that was coming up, or I have not added, maybe there was a second phase and additional people coming into not because I was trying to spare the players, but because I could feel the pace of the game dragging. Now, to your point with CNC, combat typically going quick, I find that one of the easiest ways to make combat go quick is to have fantastic crit tables. Because sometimes they go real quick when people hit those crits both ways. But even with that said, when you start getting high level, I think high level is where combat in just about any system, it's going to drag down. The only way you eliminate that is that you oversimplify it to the point where you don't have sort of the crunchiness and the additional options that players get, and that make, I think, you know, if you take a character like Irda with all that she can do at her level, and then the number of rounds, the types of enemies that they're facing, the number of spells that they can cast, this by definition starts to lengthen your combats. And I think some of them have been fun. The last one, you know, where they fought Karzug, that was probably a 4.5 hour combat. Similar thing happened with my family game, which is also ending, though I don't stream that one. I've only done it once or twice. And yeah, I mean, 4 hour combats, 5 hour combats, but when they're these epic scale concluding, those still tend to keep people engaged. But you know, what are your thoughts? Like, Robert, have you ever just sort of yanked an encounter off the table, or conversely, you feel the pace of the game is slowed, or the roll, and then you inject an encounter in there for the express purpose of the pacing?
I was kind of chuckling as you were saying ripping things out, because I get the whole ripping things out, and definitely there have been times when I've looked at something and said, okay, no, that turned out to be too much. But what I end up doing a lot, especially when I'm trying to get a feel for my players and how adept they are at combat, and if they're understanding their characters, I'll start small and add things.
Right.
Reinforcements.
Second phase.
Something hidden. Something, just if I think they're getting through it too. If I think that they're understanding what they're doing and they're getting through this more easily than I wanted to, I'll ratchet it up a little. I mean, just to give them a challenge. But it. As far as the whole, the whole magic thing, or actually talking about when you get to higher levels. So that's where I find that and this is something that I have not been happy about some of the adventures, especially WotC and D&D. They do a lot of things right, but one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of their newer adventures, they just like throw tons of mobs constantly at you, and that's not fun. Unless you have casters who are, and you're just basically giving them an excuse to throw big fireballs and whatever. It gets to be a little bit much. I want the bigger monsters. I want something that you can make an epic encounter. A combat at high level should be something where the descriptions are every bit, and normally they should be anyway, but when you get to the higher level, it's even that much more important that the description of the combat matches
Well said.
the the level of the combat.
Well said. Yeah, I don't like the you throw a fireball. You know, and that's just you can do so much more. And we've talked about this on LMAs before, so I won't dive into it too much. But combat should not stop roleplay. To me, combat really works when the players and the enemies keep role-playing during the combat. That doesn't mean they all pause for the BBEG's monologue, but it does mean that, you know, you emote and you play and you invest yourself in the character as they are in this mortal fight for their lives.
I mean, the funny thing is, I thinking about it, but like at low levels, it's like there's only so many ways you can swing a sword and kill an orc. I mean,
oh no, I totally disagree. No, there are so many places you can hit that orc, so many things you can yell at him as you do it. There's so many ways you can swing that.
And after a while, all the descriptions start to blend together.
I don't think that's true. If you think about, even if you look at our last campaign, you know, there were so many fun things that Markov did, that Alcott did, all the ways Cade would do these ridiculous things, leaping off of things and sliding under things and whipping his cape around, and there were
low-level mobs here. I'm not talking in during an epic encounter.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. To your point, if the party's fighting some goblins, you want to be careful with the length of descriptions and whatnot. You got to keep the fight moving. But I think this is all the fun stuff for the game table for the DM to decide. But I do think, coming back to that first piece on the gaming style, what you want to settle as a DM and make sure your players understand is the level of magic, the level of danger, which includes crits. You know, is permadeath, a real thing? What are the consequences if your PC dies? Process. This can all be settled in a session 0, which we've talked a lot about before. I also think, the RP amount, and then leveling speed. You know, I don't like it when they level too quick. Now, that is a problem with streaming every week. Because, back in my old days, you might get together with your gaming group, a couple times a month. When you're streaming 3 hours every single week, you look at the Dead in Greyhawk Awakening Book 2. We're at session 28 now already. So what is that? 60? It's 84 hours or so of gameplay content. They're gonna be leveling up, maybe in a faster way than you normally would organically in a campaign. But I think those are all important things to get settled at the beginning. And then I've got this article up here. This is on the writing beginner. I'll give credit to the author when I get down to it. I forget who exactly this was. But what's the basic campaign premise? A short story, the problem the players must solve, which might kick off the campaign, the setting, which we've already talked about, antagonists, campaign stakes, what happens. Not every campaign can be, the end of the world, or should be, but that's also still something that can be fun to play, and these are all things that you really want to think through. Then starting small and only build what you need for the next session. So your players are only going to be interested in what the characters are doing now. You could plan every single detail of the entire campaign, but that'll take you hours and days. It's going to be overwhelming. D&D is supposed to be fun. Never forget that. After all that work, your players will only be interested in what's happening right now. That makes sense, right? The adventure happens now, not later. So what I like about this, and Robert, I think this is a good segue into our discussion of story and in the types of stories that we tell. You, obviously, with Friday Night Crusades, because of the style that it is and the nature of sort of matriculating through, and whoever wants to show up, they can make a character on the spot, keeps it lightweight, low barrier to entry. It's become a very popular part of what we do on our Discord, so thank you for that. But I think in general, you've expressed to me before that your DMing style is going to tend to be a lot more ad hoc, that you're just going to sort of have a broad scaffolding, and that you're going to just sort of make it up on the fly and react to the players, and that's the way you prefer to DM. Is that am I saying that right, or is that oversimplifying it?
So yeah, I mean to a point. So my general premise is I'll have, and I may not know what the overall. I'll be honest with you, at the beginning of the campaign, I may not know what the end game is supposed to be. Because for all I know, the players may just decide they want to go in a completely different direction. So I take it in acts. There are antagonists. They have a plan, somewhere along the line, whether it's due to the character, usually I'll try to work it into one of the characters' backstories or more than one of the characters' backstories, or they just may end up coming straight up against it. There's going to be conflict between the player characters and the antagonists, and the antagonists have their plan. The antagonists are going to execute their plan. It may be a good plan, it may be a bad plan. Where the players decide that they're going to engage is up to them. Sometimes I'll do a little pushing to force their hand in places, but it's one of those things where I want the players to feel that they can go anywhere and do anything, but there's going to be consequences if they decide never to engage.
Well, yeah, and I think that is the art of DMing. And so let's unpack this just a bit, because I think this is one of the most important things to think through in terms of how you want to play your game and your players want to play their game. So, for example, you said you may not know the end game. Well, I think that's fine. You do want player agency. You want players to be able to make choices. Now, you can have certain mechanisms. So if you looked at book 1 of GHA, or if you looked at Rune Lords, you had there is an event that's occurring. The ancient Rune Lord of Greed of the ancient Thessalonian Empire, after thousands of years, is sucking souls through a soul lens using greed and is trying to make an imminent return. Now, those players could have chosen to jump on Cade's ship and go somewhere else, in which case it would be a different campaign. That thing would still happen. So I still began with quote-unquote an end in mind, but that didn't force the players to go that direction. Versus book 2, they get hit with that sigil. Drax has compelled them, and that's a legitimate story arc. That's not just a DM manipulation to railroad. That was a storyline to be played, and now there's only one of them left. And what's happened is the players have all chosen, with the exception of Telliadir, to follow now of their own volition, even though Rizia is still bound. If you look at the most sort of popular D&D or fantasy story of all, Lord of the Rings, Frodo could have said no. He didn't have to take that ring, but Sauron was, after it, and there was a BBEG and there was an apocalyptic event, and their choice to go off and just hang out at the Prancing Pony for the next 5 years would not have changed the story arc that was happening at a meta level, which ultimately was what they can choose or choose not to engage with. So I think when you don't allow the player agency, that becomes very frustrating to most players. At the same time, story structure and arc allows you to do those really fun storytelling things like foreshadowing. You can put little elements in session 1 that in session 75 they go, oh crap, because it was these threads were there, even though the players ultimately had the choices to go where they wanted, when they wanted to do it. But these elements of the world feel then real to them, feels like the gaming world is a real and living place. Thoughts, Robert? So
it's interesting. As a kid, Lord of the Rings, it was one of the first big adventure type, as far as series that I had read. Yeah, it went through a bunch of others, like I can't remember the name of the series, but the Black Cauldron is one of the books in it. And the epic long story arc. And I used to think that, okay, well, I should have the ending and figure out how we're going to get to the ending. And somewhere along the way, and I think it's as I started reading more and more, that I grew more fond of, I'm going to call it world building, because it's world building in the novelization sense, as opposed to a campaign setting sense, where the players don't really know what they're actually up against. They don't understand what they're not understanding the forces arrayed against them, or what they're actually getting into. Things get revealed slowly. We try to start really small, and as things happen, they become aware that there's more going on than they initially thought. The first couple of adventures may be completely local.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's completely self-contained, but there's other things going on. And what this allows me to do is I can start, like I said, I like to do it in what I call acts, where there's kind of a comprehensive story for one section, but I can start seeding the rest of it as I go on and figuring out what they're enjoying, what works, and then adding the next step. But I don't go with, okay, this is, the you talked about the Rune Lords and what was going on there. I mean, I know this is a published adventure path, and they kind of have, that's kind of have to do that. But even for myself, if I was going to create an adventure path, I wouldn't go, I wouldn't be able to do it because I don't want them to know what the ending is. It'd have to be a very, very different type of thing where they eventually get caught up in things, or they choose to get caught up in things that are, beyond what they thought. And as they rise, the world responds to them. The world, their enemies become more aware of them. The characters become a threat. They're not just going out and trying to do things. The forces are right against them, and I make sure that they're aware of this, know that they exist, and are going to take action directly against them more often as we get later in, because now they've proven themselves a bit. They're a problem, and they're a problem that the BBEG needs to resolve.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. If you look at the way, for example, go back to Greyhawk Awakening Book 1, I mean, really, still, the whole Greyhawk Awakening story, they still don't know what exactly is going on. The meta-level story, we're 78 sessions in, they don't really know. Now, there are lots of clues that have been seeded along the way, but there are still systems and things that are happening around them. But just as you said, the story is slowly unfolding. They're choosing which elements of it they want to engage in. And of course, yes, as a DM, you're adjusting, emphasizing this piece a little bit more. That NPC, that connected with them. All right, let's make that NPC more active in that campaign. This NPC didn't really connect with them. Let's phase that NPC out or make it less of a prominent piece. This villain, they really didn't like. So take Halia. Halia became a recurring villain in Book 1 until they eventually got her there toward the end, because she became such an annoying villain to them early on. But that meta arc still exists. They can engage with it as they choose to. This is it's not just Lord of the Rings. It's an element of most great storytelling, and that is what I like. What I try to do is create both enough structure that it feels like there's a cohesive world that would continue on with or without the PCs. If the PCs were suddenly all gone, that world continues on. But then also that everything in that world is reacting to them and what they do, and they're influencing those outcomes and making those choices.
Absolutely. And GHA Book 1, that's a perfect example of that. Yeah, that's how I like to do things. I want to build and let it unfold, and because also that's to me, that's the easiest way to immerse your players. Is to let the world unfold as they're doing things. I mean, the grand epic quest of Lord of the Rings, where they've got to take the ring to Mordor. Okay, that's great. You're now on a straight. However you get to that ending, you know where the ending is. I don't want them to know where the ending is.
Well, and I think that's an unfair criticism of or characterization, perhaps is a better way to say it, to Tolkien's work, because the story really began with The Hobbit, and there and back again, and there was no knowledge of what the ring was, where it needed to go, and heck, even when the Fellowship of the Ring started, he didn't know. He's got his 111th birthday, and Gandalf comes to town, and then he just knows he's got to run with this ring, but he doesn't know why, and Gandalf doesn't even really tell him what it is, and they're trying to meet. They don't know who Aragorn is. They meet him in the Prancing Pony. So that's still unfolded. But I guess to your point, the meta story becomes pretty clear fairly early on in that trilogy epic, and then the rest of it is really the fulfillment of this already foregone understanding of what they must do. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I very much I tend to really separate The Hobbit from the Lord of the Rings, because you read The Hobbit, then you start reading Fellowship of the Ring, and they're like night and day in terms of the writing style. There are times when it doesn't even feel like the same story, other than the recurring characters.
I wouldn't call it a different writing style per se. I think it felt like
the target audience was different. It felt like Lord of the Rings was aimed towards, because going back now, reading The Hobbit to me reads like a child's book. It seemed advanced when I was younger, but now it's seems much more simplistic.
Well, I think we digress a bit here, but I'm not sure, again, even The Hobbit that I would characterize as reading like a children's book. There is still some really clever language, turns of phrase, writing structure. But yeah, I take your point. Yeah, I take your point. And if you look at chat again, I don't know. I've got to ask more controversial questions. Every question I've asked, it's almost this was another universal one that most people really do like having a combination of overall cohesion to the world and the structure, but with that freedom. No one wants to be railroaded, but the general consensus is that, hey, let's all sit down at a table and we'll just kind of make stuff up as we go. That's still a fun way to play. I've done that many times, but I do think you miss another level of engagement in the game when you can't have that for whatever reason. All right. So they said on this one, rule of things, set 3 things in motion for the party to interact with. Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of the same thing Robert and I have been talking about. They have options to interact with. I don't know that I would necessarily be as contrived as choosing 3. I think that can sort of come out organically. Let the players build the world with you. Things are going to change. Let's see here. Yeah, well, they're actually kind of talking about what we said, define with an ending, but be flexible with how you get there. I would go more than that. I'd say be flexible as to what that ending even is. You have a certain sense of possible endings, but keep those open. If you go to Rune Lords, there were lots of ways that they could have gotten there, and in fact, I really expected them to die. There was part of me, as sad as I would have been and as much grief as I would have gotten from my wife, who plays Cade, I actually thought it would be interesting to see a TPK at the end of an epic campaign like that, and it was a real opportunity, and that's why I rolled, all the dice on the table, everything was visible. I gave them no favor, but they did manage to pull it out, even though there were 2. If I'm giving away spoilers, sorry, but yeah, there were 2 deaths in that final combat, not including an NPC that died. So the ending was very flexible. How you get there, of course, was highly customized.
So the
go
funny
ahead.
thing about the define the ending is like, this is kind of like going back to the, all right, well, you know how it's supposed to end. Well, my players, I've had players over the years who decided, my character reached level 10, 11, 12, and this was back in the 1E, 2E days. It's like, something? They're retiring. They've done their bit for, God and country, and they want to let somebody else take the reins, and they're going to go and build their fortress or whatever, their stronghold, and so the DM doesn't necessarily get to decide the ending, because they may not end with the same characters that they started with.
No, I think that's fair. In an example like that, Robert, you may just wind up telling a completely different story. Like I said, if the party had chosen to jump on Cade's ship and explore looking for new islands off the coast of Varesia, then I, as a DM, make a choice. Do I continue to tell that story with them and just move in a completely different arc and direction? Or do I consume them all with a Kraken and start to make them roll over and start over again? Right? But I think that's a very viable thing. Now, normally, when people sit down to play D&D, in most cases, they understand the idea that there are going to be certain stories and NPCs, and that there's a level of collaborative storytelling versus, heck, even if you take an open world game like Skyrim, there are still stories in that world that you're going, and their ultimate sort of end game goals, even in these completely open world settings, and that does seem to be what most people like. All right, so just a few more things here. So Red Monk, let me pull that back up. This is just, honestly, all I did was Google tips for starting a D&D campaign. There's actually not a lot on this when you look through the Dragon magazines, at least not that I was able to find. There were some that talk about like settings. I believe Dragon Magazine 54 I was looking at today. But there's so much interesting content out there. So this one is on Writing Beginner, and it's just how to write a D&D campaign they'll love, the ultimate DM guide. And, they're just going through some suggestions here. This is one of many. I think we all steal shamelessly. Nothing wrong with looking for ideas inside your game, thinking of how you want to start. If you look at book 1 of Greyhawk Awakening, it was the traditional you meet in a tavern. That just happened to be the Welcome Wench, which is the most iconic tavern in Greyhawk lore right there in Hamlet. And that was a fun way to start that game. If you look at book 2, They started in this dark city of Relastra. They didn't even really know each other, but they were all wandering through a town square when they witnessed a murder, and that was how that campaign session kicked off. If you look at Rune Lords, the characters didn't know each other, but they were all meeting for a religious ceremony, the dedication of a new temple, when suddenly a goblin attack breaks out, and they're overwhelming the citizens, and the players decide whether or not they want to help. So there's these different ways. Or someone put in the chat earlier, I think was Baptized in Pus, said that he started a game where the player started off with players being captured by guards and thrown in prison. Prison starts are fun. Slave cages. You can have, and of course I mean that in the context of fantasy. I want to be careful with that term even. And then things like gladiatorial pits or fighting pits. There's just so many fun ways that you can kick off your campaign, and sometimes it's fun to just start it off in combat. So there's a list of kind of short ways for campaign hooks here. There's also some automated generators that you can run, and then if you're doing world building, I've talked about World Anvil before. That's a really cool system. I'm actually creating a world in World Anvil, which is a continent in Faerun, a continent in Ord. So in Orth, I'm going to have a separate continent outside the Flanaess in Orth, and that will be the continent that I refer to as Riven Realm. So there's all kinds of ways you can approach it. Ultimately, though, just remember, it's about having fun. But I like the story structures for foreshadowing, pacing, but maintaining player agencies. Okay. All right, so Robert, we just have a few minutes left. What other topics would you like to sort of discuss, or any other questions that we could pop in the chat, and or suggestions? As I said, I've got the new Sunday campaign will be kicking off here in a few weeks. We'll do some interim content, so Blue Box won't be silent on Sundays. But I don't want to rush my new campaign. I want to make sure I've got that ready to go. And so when I kick that off, that will be in the gaming world of Aird. And I guess that's something we didn't talk about today, but with your campaign, what gaming system are you going to run? Are you going to run 1E, 2E, like Jay and that crew? Are you going to run Pathfinder 3.5 or PF2E? Are you going to run 5E? Are you going to run CNC? There are many systems out there. Understanding what works for your players and your DMing gaming style, that's a really important consideration early on, and can help set the tone. Robert?
It's kind of funny because I'm currently playing in Terry's new campaign on Monday nights, playing Pathfinder 2E. And I'll tell you, as a player, I love it. I would not choose it as, for me, it's not the kind of game I'd want to run. Or gaming, I shouldn't say game, the kind of gaming system rule set I want to run.
Why is that? What about it? Because I've only seen a little bit of it. I'm not really familiar with it.
So I've been gravitating more and more towards rules light systems.
Right.
And I like the
flexibility. It's like CNC.
Siege engine with CNC. Pathfinder 2E is very well. I mean, it's extremely well put together from everything I've seen. They've got stuff for everything. I don't want and 10-year-old, 12-year-old me would have eaten that up, and you would not have seen me for a month, because I'd be pouring through every book to learn everything I possibly could. I don't. That's not how I want to run games anymore. It doesn't fit my style as well. But as a player, I love it. It's been a lot. It's been a lot of fun playing in the game. Of course, it helps when you're playing with people that you enjoy.
Sure, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. You can separate the game versus the rule system.
Yeah, and I mean, there are different types of games where some rule sets fit better. For me, I like the prototypical. Maybe a little more magic than Lord of the Rings, but that kind of setting feeling to it, the classic setting, and CNC it scratches that itch, but it to me, because of it going rules light, the things that kind of annoyed me back in the 1E 2E days don't get in the way anymore for me. If there are things that I want to bring back, I can easily bring them back in, but it's a lot for me. I like the flexibility that it gives me in terms of adjusting the game the way that I want to run it, the things that I want to offer, and creating new content for it too. I think those are all really good points, and a lot of that too depends on your players. So if you take someone like a Thomas, or heck, even a Rory,
these players, they love to mine the systems, to mine the spells, to look for, cool. So the more you can give them, the more crunchiness you can give them, the happier they are, because they do all this stuff off hours, and that just occupies them in the way they like to think. You do that with, Cade. Just, nope. Okay, the more rules I throw at Cade, the more confusing it is to Cade. So you have to know your players, and then work a game that makes for. All right, so we have a couple things in the chat. One, Tim tried to make a humble barbarian game, but the players are too good at winning barbarian street cred. I like this one here. Baptized in Pus said, as a DM, do you prefer the players make random characters, or do you set the stage of what might be the best classes? Depends on the game. So most games, most campaigns, I'm going to tell the players to make whatever you want. I have certain, I don't play what I consider to be some of the funkier races. I don't have turtle people and stuff like that in my games. Probably the most exotic that I run is a half ogre. But that's a DM preference and style. Then classes, I don't allow evil characters, with the exception of an evil character which the PC has the players discuss with the DM first, and there's a story arc associated with it. Ultimately, my games are neutral to good aligned, and an all evil party. I'm not going to play a game with a bunch of murder hobos that go into cities and kill and pillage, and that's not the kind of game I want to run. If that's a game you want to play, that's fine. I'm just not the DM for you. So those would be the only real restrictions that I'm typically going to put at the beginning. Now, one exception to that would be if there's a certain style. If you go to the game that I've played here at home now this is going on 6 years with my family, and that's also concluding. It's kind of sad, all these campaigns that are after such a long time coming to a close. But it was based on a campaign structure and path which had heavy demonic combat, specifically designed elements. You really needed a paladin in that party. So in that case, I might go to the players, or maybe to a certain player that I know has a bent toward that, and say, hey, I'm not telling you have to, but it would be really helpful for one of you to be a paladin in this party. That's about as far as I typically would go in terms of influencing what they can roll up. What do you think?
So yeah, I agree with the, if you're going to play a certain type of game, I would at least put not necessarily a paladin, but at least a holy warrior sometime, even if it's a really battle hardened cleric, something that's good. If it's going to be an undead heavy game or demonic, something where being able to, I'll let them know that, you might want to consider this. The problem is, I struggle sometimes with those games because unless you run into danger of, who's playing the paladin? What is everyone else playing? And are everyone else going to feel? Yeah, that's just good DMing. I mean, if you don't know how to move the spotlight around, your players are not going to stay at your table very long. So that's I agree with you, Robert. You definitely don't want something where one person feels like the star and everybody else is simply a member of the supporting cast. You'll lose players that way. But and then what happens if the character dies?
Well, I mean, if the character dies, the character dies. I mean, the world can be lost. Evil can triumph. All right, so we got a couple more things here we want to get to. So Necromantic DM, use session 0 to have them make characters together. Also, I have a general theme for the campaign so they can move the characters that are useful. I think that's a good way to do it. I've even kicked around this idea, and there's some parts of it I like and parts that I've thought about doing a session 0 where the PCs are all, let's call them, teenagers or preteens. And they've come, maybe they're a street gang that's come together to survive in the inner city somewhere, or maybe they're, for whatever the reason is, that you have all these characters that are sort of in a, let's call it like 13 to 17 range. And then they have sort of this fun where they're very weak, but story-based introduction. Then there's a sort of like a pause in the story, essentially, and you come back now and they're all 3 years older, and this is what they've been doing for 3 years. The only downside of that is you wind up really scripting a lot of their backstory for them. but I've always thought that might be a fun mechanism as a way to kick off a campaign.
One of the things that I've been looking to do, and I need to go back and read it again because I haven't run it in probably 25 years, was the treasure hunt module, where the characters, they didn't have a character class at the beginning, and over the course of the adventure, that's when they made it to level 1, and certain things happened, and they chose their class. I've thought about trying to do that again. Sometimes I think you have to find a group that's up for it, because you need to make sure that if they're comfortable with the characters that they've end up having. So getting a group that doesn't have a class can be, you have to have the right players for that one. But it's like I've been bouncing that idea around and still haven't come up with a good way to work it yet.
Yeah, a lot of times, what's fun is you can have sort of class-specific areas for each of the different characters, or you could be even race-specific characteristics or backstory-specific. If you got the noble, there's those sort of clever ways for the DM to weave in what I refer to as the spotlight. Where maybe, and I think if you look at for example, our Greyhawk Awakening players, they're all so good at understanding, okay, right now the spotlight is on Vivi, and they'll all participate and they'll stay engaged, but they don't start jockeying for time or position. And what that means is now you're going to have that same opportunity at some point. And it's not always necessarily one character. It might be a dialogue that's happening between 2 or 3 members of the party, and the other 2 members of the party are doing something different or not engaged in that dialogue, but they allow that to kind of come to fruition naturally. That is, I think, a really good way to keep people engaged in the story. All right, so just the last couple things we have here. So Red Monk said, I had a short campaign. I had a friend. It turned out that way. Unfortunately, accepted saying, I get that. So, Jay, and we'll be rating in just a moment. Thanks for popping in the chat and for lurking with us. I want to come back to this idea of the evil character. Somebody mentioned earlier that it's a no-no. Red Monk said it's a hard rule at the table. I have liked it, and it's happened. I've done it with an NPC, but I've done it with 2 PCs, I think, in my time of DMing, where it was a player that I knew well enough could run it correctly, and it's essentially putting a betrayer in the party. So the character, even though they're evil, is not behaving with overtly evil actions. So they're still going to save the town. They're still going to do whatever it is that makes them look as though they are in alignment, I use that in the looser sense of the term, with the goals of the rest of the party, all with the purpose of at some point, the reveal, the betrayal, and this aha moment where you find out that all along this person that you thought was a good or neutral member of your party is not. Now, of course, by the time people get up with detect evil and other capabilities, that's got to be something that's thought through to make it work. But I have had some, jaw-dropped, moments in my games where you unveil the evil PC, but that's the only way I've found it to be consistent with the style of game that I run and not become a distraction at the table. All right, any other last questions? If the player and the DM are on the same page and advances this story, exactly. That's what I'm saying, Dave. Made your friends kill evil characters. Played one game. Well, Tim, you don't even like it when people steal from your PCs. Played one game with Tim where I had a thief, and the thief just happened to pull a little something out of his pocket. Tim is pissed at me for a year over that. He still brings it up. So yeah, you got to be careful when you're playing with Tim. He'll hold a grudge. But anyway, I want to say thank you tonight. This has given me some things to think about. You can drop suggestions also in the Discord. If there are things that you would like to see, by the way, if you're not in our Discord, you should be. Let me go ahead and do that because there is so much fun content and discussion that's happening there. That's a link to our Discord. Jump in there. But if you have suggestions, so for example, when I get to book 3, I've already made this very clear. Book 3 could start in 2 weeks. If they decide, to your point, Robert, what if Rizia dies and the rest of the party says, screw it, we're not doing this, we're not going there, that effectively then is going to end book 2. we may still come back to those players, but then we would go to book 3, or book 3 could be, end of 2022 or 2023 at some point. But I've already made it clear that that's going to be a Dark Sun based book. It'll be taking place in the Sea of Dust and the Dry Steppes in the southwest part of the Flyness. So if there's things that you think, man, I like that setting, I know that's a favored setting for many, and you'd like to see certain things there or have ideas about how to tell a great story in that area, pop them in the Discord. Similarly, if you know anything about Aired and the CNC game world and you have those ideas, pop them in the Discord. You can DM me or you pop it in the normal sort of Blue Box general channel. Or if there's just things you'd like to see, hey, John, I think I've really liked the way these games have gone, but it'd be cool if we had more of this, or have you ever thought about doing that? I'm very open to suggestions. As a DM, I think you should always keep growing. If you ever get to the place where you just feel like, okay, this is who I am as a DM, I have nothing more to learn, I think that's when you stop the process of getting better and growing. So I love constructive feedback. I love ideas. I don't take all of them necessarily, but I like listening to them, and I do take some of them. So with all that said, Robert, I want to give you the final word. Again, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight. I always enjoy our sort of counterpoints. It does seem like we're getting along or agreeing on things more than we used to, which is somewhat concerning. It is, but we're glad you're hale and well. And do you have any sort of final parting thoughts?
So I mean, new campaigns. It's an exciting thing, and it just I'm always looking forward to the next one, even when I'm in the middle of any given one, because you have those ideas in your head and you want to get them out there, and so take inspiration where you can. Use the inspiration that you already have. Find ideas and things like you mentioned, ideas. Even if it's something that you don't use, it may spark something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
You might come up with something. Oh wait, this may not work, but this would. So have at it. Just keep writing new adventures and doing new things and keep playing.
I think that is very well said, my friend. All right, so hang on, everybody, and hey, thank you very much, everybody, for the kind words in the chat. And I've had people talk about longer LMAs quite a bit. And, we have sprinkled in a couple 2-hour LMAs. We've done some 1.5 ones. They tend to be 1 hour and 15. We may get to some longer LMAs. That has come up quite a bit. And yes, we need to get back to the anti-paladin discussion. That is still, well, I think it's settled, but there is still some debate to be had. Oh, thank you, Red Monk. I'm glad you do too. I have to me, these LMAs, they are they're less intense and stressful than the games where I have to prep so much and get ready and then run the characters through. I like just sitting sometimes and chatting with cool people or people like Robert, and having all these great folks in our chat. And I had to get one in, Rob.
Hey, listen, I would never consider myself one of the cool kids, so.
You are definitely one of the cool kids, Robert. All right, well, anyway, thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and raid Jay here, so stay with us, please. And you always will enjoy his content. By the way, it looks like I'm going to be in Jay's game for one night coming up in July. I've actually got a trip up in his neck of the woods. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh and Philly. And so I'll give you more detail on that, but I may be sitting with his Thursday night crew and playing in a game.
In July?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, I know you're pretty close by, too. I'll let you know when that is, Robert.
A little over 2 hours, but depending on when it is.
That's not bad. Yeah. Let's talk for sure. All right, guys, here we go. Rating Jay now. 3, 2, and 1. Boom.
And we are out. And he's still